Sungenis coming to you once again on the Robert Sungenis live program, this time for April the 13th in the year 2022, in the year of our Lord. So glad you could be with us tonight. As you know, this program is set aside for you to ask your questions, give your comments on any topic whatsoever. And I, as my role as host of this program, will endeavor to answer your questions to the best of my ability using our Catholic faith, the Bible, tradition, the fathers, the popes, the councils, the catechisms, the encyclopedias, the saints, the doctors, and just about anything I can find to help you walk away satisfied that your question has indeed been answered. We come to you every Wednesday from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And tonight, we have nothing on the agenda. So we are free for all kinds of questions. So if you would like to ask a question, please use the chat room and chat board, whatever they call it. And this time, since my producer is not with me tonight, I have a couple rules I want to pass along. I haven't said them in a while, so I'll need to repeat them. One is, if you have a question, make sure you put the word question in capital letters in front of your question so that I know it's a question and not just a chat. And depending on how many people we have, limit your questions to maybe 2, possibly 3 questions, so that those who want to ask a question are not bumped off. And let me see, is there anything else? No, we'll go the full 2 hours tonight and may go over. I don't know, depends on. Now, something happened to my captions. I need to, readjust those. Yeah, I'm not Father Umberto. Robert Sungenis. And let me see. We have some questions on the chat already. And I will go to them. First, we got one mail-in question I'll get to. Get that out of the way. This is from Michael. Michael says, there are few Jewish organizations that seem to have a rather anti-Christian base and agenda. Have you ever had a debate with a Jewish rabbi or any other Jewish apologist? Would you consider a debate with one, for example, someone like Tovia Singer? Wishing you a blessed Triduum and Holy Eastertide. Okay. Yeah, I would debate any Jewish theologian who wants to debate. That's no problem. Yeah, but I want him to have some credentials. I like him to be qualified because, in my experience over 30 years now in debating, everybody wants to debate, but few are qualified. Actually, there are probably a lot more qualified than I believe there are, but if we're going to have a good debate, we have to, let me take these glasses off here. We have to have somebody who knows his material. That's first in order. So yeah, I would be willing to do that. As far as, what was it, the other part? Have you ever had a debate with a Jewish rabbi? I did have one debate with a Jewish fellow many years ago, probably about, 10 to 15 years ago. And what was the nature of the debate? Don't remember. Sorry. Then I had a sort of a written casual exchange with another Jewish fellow. And this was over a book that was written by Klinghoffer, David Klinghoffer, a Jewish man who works for the Discovery Institute, if I remember correctly. And he wrote a book, Why the Jews Did Not Accept Jesus Christ, something along that line for the title. I think it was written in the early 2000s, say 2005, 6, 7, around there. And he, in his book, he went through all the Old Testament passages that Catholics or Christians use as prophecy about Christ. And I answered all those. And as a matter of fact, that paper is still on our website for those of you who are interested. It is a book. Just look under Jewish, the Jewish category on our website, robertsongenis.org, and you'll see a name there, David Klinghoffer. And you'll see the title of this book there, and go read it, and you'll see we did a pretty handy job answering all his objections. The thing that amazed me the most about his book, it's about 250 pages long, and he tried to make it out that the Jews were just a tribe of people who were trying to find God, and all the other nations kept getting in the way, and especially the Romans toward the end. And he didn't mention one sin that the Jews had committed in their time as the people of God, from the time of Abraham in the 2000 BC area all the way up to Christ. Not one sin. And it was a total, absolute whitewash of the Jewish time on earth that I had ever seen. And so part of that paper, if you read it, you will see how I mentioned that up front, that fact of his book. And it was very disturbing, because you really can't turn a page in the Old Testament and not find one sin of the Jews from the 2,000 years that they were the chosen people. It's amazing that, and of course, this is no excuse to the Gentiles, okay, because in the Old Testament, they came before the Jews, and they were so sinful that, God destroyed the whole world. So we have nothing to be proud about, that's for sure. But when you try to prop up the Jewish people as this just totally dedicated to God, and the nations were just putting, trap after trap, for the Jews, and they just, were trying hard, but everybody was against them, and make it out that, this was a practically sinless people. It was just one of the most disturbing books I've ever read. And of course, I was called an anti-Semite for writing the critique of his book, because I just have no sympathy for the Jews, okay? Which is total lie, absolutely. But yeah, that's one of the biggest. I think that paper was 50 or 60 pages long, because I went into detail answering every one of his so-called verses that, doesn't speak of Christ, and a lot more. There's a lot more there than that. And I think half of that paper was published in Culture Wars. The other half that dealt with the scriptural passages was not published, because it would have been too long. And as a matter of fact, somebody wrote into Culture Wars, I remember, and said, Okay, so where are the Catholic answers to all these Jewish interpretations of the Old Testament passages that supposedly speak of Christ? Because he made them sound pretty legit, like they had some substance to them. And dealing with the virgin from Isaiah 7 and all kinds of passages. I answered every one of them. So if you want a compendium of Jewish passages that are used by Jews to prophesy some other Messiah other than Jesus Christ, give it a read. You'll enjoy it, and I should actually make it into a book. Maybe someday I will. Anyway, that's the mail-in question we have for today. So let me go to the questions on the board here. All right, question: why do EOs/00s? I don't know what that is. Insist so vehemently that Roman Christology is heretical? I guess you mean Eastern Orthodox. Okay. And that St. Leo and the Council of Chalcedon are the worst things since the fall. Well, aren't we the ones that condemned Nestorius, and we called it the Nestorian heresy? And that was within the first 7 councils, the ones where the Eastern Orthodox were Catholic, and there was no split at that time. And that means the people that eventually formed the Eastern Orthodox Church were in the time where they believed the 7 councils of the Catholic Church were infallible and gave us the correct doctrine. And that's when the Nestorian heresy was condemned. So what do they have to go by to even make the claim? Because if they make the claim that the Catholic Church was wrong in condemning the Nestorian heresy, then they're just as guilty, because that's the church that they came from and that they believe was under the 7 infallible councils. So they have no room to speak. They're just condemning themselves, basically. They're saying that Christianity went off the beaten path early on if they claim that any of those 7 councils made the wrong decisions on Catholic doctrine. Okay, so excuse me for that. So I see no merit in the argument. Okay, but there's a lot of doctrines that the Eastern Orthodox nitpick their way through to try to find some error, some thing that they can disagree with. And this has been going on for 1,000 years. And I don't expect it to stop anytime soon. Okay. I think this whole thing with the Filioque was a ridiculous issue from which the church split off, the Eastern Orthodox. Because as they're even showing now, when they're still working on it, these things can be ironed out. And I know they did try to iron it out at one time, and then that fell apart for some reason. But I think the reason it fell apart was not for theological reasons as much as it was political reasons, because this has been the paradigm of East-West relations since the dawn of history. The East and the West somehow always split up over something. If it's not politics, it's money. If it's not money, it's theology. It's always something that divides them. And that's because of the logistical problem we have. At that time, they were just too far away to have, if you're going to have meaningful dialogue, meaningful authority, the distance problem has to be taken care of. And you have to trust that the people who are on the other side of the fence are not going to take advantage of the distance and make decisions on their own, because the excuse would be, well, it takes too long for the Pope to make a decision, and we need a decision now. I know that's a temptation, but you can't fall for that temptation, because the consequences are much worse than you think the problem is. So the Filioque could have been ironed out, and even issues of purgatory can be ironed out if the two sides would sit down together. But I find the Eastern Orthodox are very stubborn people. They're very dedicated, but they're also very stubborn. Somehow they think they have the whole truth and made no mistakes. And, the Catholics are always at fault for when the doctrine goes awry. Anybody knows that can't be the truth. Okay. There's always a middle ground that you can reach, something that you can agree on to stop the split, because unification is as important as the doctrine that you claim to have the truth on. After all, it was from the United Catholic Church in the first 7 councils that they believe in, where most of the truth comes from, that we believe as Catholics. Most of it was already formulated. And we're just carrying water for the church right now, because she did all the what they call the muscle work, the hard work in getting these doctrines in order for us. So the East owes a big debt to the West for putting all these doctrines in order, at least for the first 7 councils they believe in. And that's where most of the meat of the Christian faith is. I would say 80% of it is there in the first 7 councils. Okay. So she did all the legwork and under the guidance of the Holy Spirit. So there's no reason for a split, no reason at all. And I hope to God that the people in charge can come to some resolution at some point. And at least they're talking. They are talking, which is a good first step. All right. Next question. Michael says, I've been listening to your show for a while, but this is my first time here live. Very happy to be able to make it this evening. Well, good, Michael. Nice to have you. And I hope I don't bore you to death, but glad to have you here. Ask a question if you feel. All right, next person, Canadian Catholic, says, question, are early Pontifical Biblical Commission rulings now contradicted by recent Catholic scholarship, including PBC, binding and infallible? Well, up until 1971, the Pontifical Biblical Commission was an authoritative arm of the Catholic Church, not infallible. Okay, infallibility is a special category, but authoritative, meaning that until further notice, unless something overturns it, which could happen in the future, this is what you are to believe. The PBC had that power. The PBC under Pius X, for example, in the 1910s and onward, very powerful institution. What they said, everybody abided by. And they went into the nitty-gritty of interpreting scripture, of setting interpretations for canon law, things of that sort. PBC was a very powerful and very needed institution, especially at those times when liberalism and modernism were hitting the church like nobody's business. So if they didn't have any authority, then they would have been impotent, basically, just giving their opinions. That's not what we needed at the time. The Pope didn't have a lot of time, even Pius X, who wrote 3 encyclicals against the liberals. He didn't have a whole lot of time to go into all the details of what was happening from this avalanche of, I would say, anti-Christian interpretation of the Bible, of church dogma, of the fathers. So it was a very needful thing at that time. You also had the Jesuit journal. What was that? What was that called? Catholica, that's the second word, I forget the first word. They were very influential in the church, and this was around, say, the 1800s. I think before the PBC was formed, we had the Jesuits. When the Jesuits were good, now they're not so good. They've been up and down like a watching an electrocardiogram go up and down. You never know where they're going to turn out in any particular century, in the what, 5 centuries or so that they've been around. But at least that time in the 1800s, they were decent and very helpful for the church. So anything the PB says today is just an opinion. Okay. Just like anything the Pope says today that is not officially branded as a doctrinal statement of the church, anything the Pope says, that is Pope Francis, is not even authoritative unless he says it's authoritative. Okay. Much of what we get from him today is just opinion. And the same with the PBC. So one of my favorite targets for the PBC is Father Raymond Brown. He was elected president of the PBC by John Paul II in 1993. And Father Raymond Brown is probably the worst Catholic theologian we have ever had in modern times. And I don't say that lightly. I've read his works. I know what the man's about, and I know what he tried to do, which is basically overturn every traditional doctrine we had. And the reason he never got excommunicated, like Hans Kuhn did, was because he was a little smarter than Hans Kuhn. Instead of coming out with an indicative statement like Hans Kuhn did, this doctrine over here is not correct, Father Brown would always put his objections in the form of an interrogative, a question. Is papal infallibility really what the church taught? Question mark. Okay. Was Mary really a virgin when she gave birth to Jesus? Is the Bible really inspired in all its words? Things like that. On and on and on and on. And Father Brown was the president of the PBC. Okay. So in a sense, we're lucky that Paul VI rescinded the authority of the PBC. Perhaps even then, of course, when it was Raymond Brown was and his colleagues, and there's dozens of them who think the same way, and they're all infiltrated into the Catholic Church, wearing a Roman collar. Okay. Even at that time, 1971, apparently the Pope had enough. There was enough heterodox teachings going around under the PBC label that he just said, now it's time. And he cut their power, basically. So anything the PBC says today, you just take it as an opinion, a pious opinion, to be polite to them. Okay, so all right, next question. What are your thoughts on folks saying Pope Benedict may still be the Pope and not Francis? My thoughts are they are wrong, and we need to go deeper than that. And that is, they really have no authority to say such things in open public. Okay, it's like getting on the internet and saying Pope Francis is not the Pope, Pope Benedict is. That's a no-no. Okay, you can have your opinion because you have a free will to believe that Pope Benedict is the Pope. Nobody will take that free will away from you. Okay, but then when you go out and you act as an authority for the church, and you get on your hobby horse and you start saying as a fact that Pope Benedict is not is the Pope and Pope Francis isn't, well, then you've made yourself the Pope. Okay, you've made yourself higher than the Catholic hierarchy. That's all there is to it. And brother, listen, you don't want to put yourself in that position, because for every word you say along those lines, where you pretend to have some authority, some insight that somebody else is missing, you're putting yourself under God's judgment. Okay? The Catholic Church has a hierarchy for a reason, and that is so no Tom, Dick, or Harry can come along and say, well, God's given me the gift of knowledge to discern these things, and I've come up with the conclusion that Pope Francis is not the Pope, no matter what the magisterium says or what the cardinals or bishops say. Okay? Remember back in the Old Testament, Nathan, or was it Dathan and Abihu, said to Moses, what gives you the right to tell us what to do, to be authority? God's blessed us too. And didn't Aaron and Miriam come to Moses also with that same complaint? Moses, yeah, you're okay, but why can't God give us the same authority that you seem to have? Basically challenging his authority, basically trying to trump him. And of course, we know what happened to them. Dathan and Abihu got swallowed up by the earth. The earth opened up, took them inside, and closed again. And I'm sure after it closed again, you couldn't even see the seam where it had opened. God was so perfect in closing it up, as if Dathan and Abihu, who are they? And then Miriam comes down with leprosy on her arm as soon as she and Aaron tried to challenge Moses. And Moses, as meek as he was and as merciful as he was, prayed to God for her that he would take the leprosy away, and God answered his prayer. God showing who was the boss. Moses was the boss, and God listened to him, answered his prayer for Miriam, the very one that tried to usurp his authority. So thank God for people like Moses. But brother, if you're going to stand up there and say that Pope Benedict is the Pope, I hope a Moses is around for you when it comes time for God to judge what you've said, because you have no authority to say it, whoever you are. Okay? All right, next question. Can you please cut down on the frequency of your commercials? I love your program so much, but the amount of ads makes it difficult. I have to keep clicking my phone to skip. Brother, I wish I could. I have told YouTube I don't want any commercials on my show, and they keep putting them on. So they don't listen to me. And I've told them at least 3 times. I'll probably go back there again to tell them, but I have no control over the commercials. See, this is the big sham of YouTube that I hate. I love the fact that we can come to you on this program and talk to you, but when they just step right over you, and you can click that box 1,000 times that says, I don't want any commercials, they still put the commercials on there. Okay, so it's not me, it's them. And I frankly don't know what to do about it. So if somebody else out there has some suggestions as to what to do about it, like, I don't know, write a letter to the president of the company, whoever that is, I will do so. But I don't like the commercials any more than you do, believe me. So I'm stuck for an answer. Question, what do you think about Sam Shamoun? And what was his issue with your theology recently? Well, I don't think it's anything real serious, but Sam does not like when I use David as an example of Catholic justification, because I claim that when Paul uses David in Romans 4, he's using him as an example of justification. If you remember Romans 4, first of all, it uses Abraham as an example of someone who's been justified by faith, not works. And then it uses David from verses 5 to 8. And in that passage, David is being quoted from Psalm 32, where David said, "Blessed is the man whose sins are forgiven," blah, 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 blah. And I've used that as an example of the fact that because David wrote Psalm 32 after his sin with Bathsheba and Uriah the Hittite, which were mortal sins. In other words, adultery with Bathsheba was a mortal sin, and murdering her husband, of course, was a mortal sin. So if that's the case, then according to Catholic theology, David is without grace at that time and is in a state of mortal sin such that if he were to die, he would go to hell. Okay. And the remedy for that, Paul says, is to be justified. In other words, David has to repent of his sin, and when he does, then his soul is restored, and we call that justification. So Sam's problem with that is that I can't say definitively that David lost his justification, and that Sam believes, if I'm reading him correctly, that David, as I have said, was justified long before he justified long before he committed his sins with Bathsheba and Uriah the Hittite. So we agree on that, but Sam claims that he never lost that justification, that all he needed to do was sort of get back to a status with God by saying, yeah, I did wrong. And that's all based on his previous justification. The one he had as a boy when he killed Goliath, or he was chosen over his 7 brothers to be king because he was so good. My argument has always been to the Protestants, if that's the case with David, then obviously he was a justified boy and he was a justified man long before he met Bathsheba. So what happens when he meets Bathsheba? Well, he falls into mortal sin. That's what we call it in Catholic Church. Adultery and murder are mortal sins. And why does the church say you have to go back to confession? No, not back to confession. You have to go to confession and confess those mortal sins. And that's because you need to get your justification back. Because after you commit murder and adultery, you're lost. You're a total godless person, and you need to be restored to the faith. Now, that's not true with venial sins. Venial sins, we can even confess them on our own. But we know we don't lose our justification when we commit venial sins. But mortal sins, that's a totally different story. And that's what David did. And that's why Paul's using him as an example of justification. Why even mention David in Romans 4 if David's not going to be used as an example of justification? After all, he just talked about Abraham, who was justified. Okay, so then what's David doing there if he's didn't get justified just like Abraham did? Okay, Sam's argument doesn't make any sense. Because Sam's argument is that David never lost his justification. Now, this is just his Protestant theology surfacing again that needs to be circumcised, let's say, and put right. Okay, if Sam wants to be a Catholic, that is. Now, I'm not sure what Sam wants to be. He praises me up and down for the debate I had with James White that said that changed his mind from Protestant justification to Catholic justification, and yet Sam's not willing to accept all of the Catholic teaching on justification, okay, which says that you can lose your justification and you can get it back by confessing your sins, okay? So that's where Sam and I have diverged, and I wrote my last entry into his blog probably about 3 weeks ago. I said all I'm going to say prior to that. I think I wrote 2 or 3 more entries prior to that, and Sam has to make his decision what he wants to do. So it's all up to him. All right, next question. What are your thoughts on the Pine Creek theorem, which states women have converted more men to Christianity than the Holy Spirit ever has? I'm very tempted, Duke, to just skip over this question, but wow, I never heard anything so absurd in my life, because women don't convert anybody to Christianity, and neither do men. It is the Holy Spirit that converts them, and he uses us to do it. Okay, now if that's what they mean, that there are more women who, by the power of the Holy Spirit, have led people to be converted by the Holy Spirit, well, maybe I might have some. I don't know. What statistic is he going by? I mean, is it written down the Farmer's Almanac or something? This many women, led people to Christ, as opposed to how many men led people to Christ? And what's the criteria you're going to judge by? I mean, it's absurd. So that's my opinion. All right. KPN says, what happened to my question? KPN, yours was the first one answered. Why do Eastern Orthodox insist so vehemently that Roman Christology is heretical? All right. What are your thoughts on folks saying, okay, we already had that one. Okay, question. I am calling into the Catholic faith from Protestantism. What Catholic church do you recommend? Well, there's only one Catholic church there, Gene. So, you mean what, you probably mean what, I don't know what the correct word to use is, what apostolate, what authorized branch of Catholicism, like there's the FSSP, Fraternity of St. Peter, which is approved by the Vatican. There are the Benedictines, there are there's all kinds of different branches, but we all come from the same church. We all follow the same rules. The Pope is the authority for each of whatever branch of Catholicism there is. And so there's only one church. We all have the same, well, there's a lot that have the traditional Mass, but there's more than 90% that have the Novus Ordo Mass. And that would be a liturgical difference, but that's, because one is said in Latin, one is said in English, and there's not much meat there to make a division, in my opinion. But, you can walk into any Catholic church, Gene, and say, I want to be a Christian, and they're going to do the same thing for you that any other Catholic church would do. They're going to put you under, catechetical lessons, and they're going to examine your heart to make sure that you really know what you're doing, and they will baptize you, and they may confirm you at the same time, and you'll receive the Eucharist, and you'll go to confession. They'll all do the same thing. Okay, so it doesn't make any difference what Catholic church you walk in. That's the beauty of the Catholic faith. Is we don't have to worry about when the rules are going to change because we walk into another church. That's why I'm a Catholic. One of the reasons why I'm a Catholic, because that's the unity that Jesus talked about. That's what we have. So that may not be the answer you're looking for, but that's the answer you need. Okay. All right. Thomas says, should Catholics read the William Barclay commentaries? Are you spelling his name right there, Tom? Is it B-R-C-L-E-Y or L-A-Y? I haven't come across those in a very long time, but you could read them. There's no harm in reading a commentary as long as you know ahead of time that this is his opinion. Okay, and you can take or leave his opinion. Now, if you're not a strong Catholic, and I believe you are, Tom, you don't have to worry about it. But if you're a weak Catholic and you're persuaded by, every wind of doctrine that comes along, and you find something in Barclay's commentaries that, it's not Catholic, but you don't know it, well, then you're going to have a problem unless you go consult somebody else. But you can read, as a matter of fact, I suggest you read a lot of different commentaries. As a matter of fact, what you'll see is exactly what Jean and I were just talking about. And that is, there's a lot of different interpretations out there of the same passage. And this is the nature of the beast. We're never going to get away from it. But in the Catholic Church, there's a set of passages that we have that are given one interpretation. And you either accept that interpretation by the authority of the magisterium, or you can't be Catholic. And one of them would be the same thing Jean would run into, which is being baptized into the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church believes baptism is the means of salvation. It's not a symbol. It's not a demonstration of your faith. It's not the Word of God. Baptism is the means that God uses to give grace to your soul. And without baptism, you don't get that grace. And somebody may say, well, that's a silly ritual, isn't it? Well, that's what God ordered. And there's a very good reason why he ordered it. Because it keeps the Catholic Church organized. It's the official stamp that God has saved this person through the very baptism that he's receiving. You see, and it works very well in the Catholic Church. You can write to the Catholic Church you went to 30 years ago and say, I need my baptismal certificate because I'm getting married and they need to know if I'm a true Catholic. No fuss, no muss. They'll have that baptismal certificate to you within 3 weeks. And there you go. There's your ticket. Okay? So it becomes very valuable for the practical things in life, as well as being the means of grace God gives us. So you have to accept that as a Catholic. If you don't, go be a Methodist or a Baptist, whatever you want to be, but you can't be Catholic. Okay? So that's where the Catholic Church draws its line in the sand. Many other passages you can have any interpretation. As long as it doesn't go outside the bounds of the Catholic faith, you're free to interpret things the way you want to interpret them. Okay? But when it comes to certain passages of Scripture, no, there's a circle drawn around them that you can't go beyond. And that's what you would need to know before you go read a commentary that is from anybody, not just William Barclay. Okay? All right. All right. Question. Hi, Robert. In your opinion, is it true that Sister Lucia was replaced by a false person? If so, why? And what happened to the real one? Thanks. Well, it is a working theory that Sister Lucia died, or probably died around the late 50s in the 20th century. And in order to keep the story alive that was being propagated by the liberal end of Catholicism, which was the opinion that there is no doom and gloom to worry about, that everything's going to be fine. We're going to have there's a little gnat bothering me. We're going to have a springtime in the church. sooner than you can say springtime. And so we had a divergent view among the conservatives and the liberals in the Catholic Church. The conservatives were saying, you better listen to what Sister Lucia is saying, because if you don't, we could have World War III on our hands, and half the world could be annihilated. And that's because of the sins that have been increasing, and the fact that Russia turned totally atheistic and was bent on ruling the world. So we were in pretty tough times. So there had to be, the theory is that there had to be some replacement of Sister Lucia so that they could use her to convince the world of what they wanted the world to believe regarding Fatima. And the reason for this is that when you compare the faces of the pre-1957 Sister Lucia with the post-1957 Sister Lucia, you see completely different people. And this isn't just opinion, pious opinion. The person that has done this is Peter Chanowski. I know him. He is very studious. He's no slouch. And he has been on this case with forensic experts, examining facial structure, profiles, all kinds of things. And their consensus, it's not a perfect consensus, but it is a consensus, I think, in the 90% range, or right around there, that the Sister Lucia that we have seen past 1957 is not the same as the Sister Lucia before 1957. And if you're going to make that claim, you better have the evidence. And that's where the evidence starts. That's where the claim starts, with the fact that we have two different looking people. You can see this for yourself. I mean, the profile, as a matter of fact, is probably the easiest way to see the difference between the two Sister Lucias. They are as different as night and day, and anyone can see that. And if you can't, someone can point it out to you, and you go, oh yeah, wow, what a difference. I did this myself, to try to duplicate what the forensic experts had already found out, and it was easy to show that. So there's something there, okay? And to hide your head in the sand and say, well, no, it just can't be, is playing right into the devil's hands. Look, evidence is evidence. We use it to convict people in a court of law every day. Without evidence, you really couldn't say anything about anything. But if you've got the evidence, then the question is, what are you going to do with it? You're just going to sit on your thumbs and just hope it goes away, and hope that, wow, things aren't that bleak, that the very Sister Lucia that we thought was the real one is actually a fake? Yeah, that could be possible. Very possible. What I know about these hierarchs in the Catholic Church from the early 1900s and onward, these guys are a bunch of criminals. I'm telling you, they are a bunch of criminals. And we see the fruits of it today. Look at the homosexuality that's going on. And do you think it's stopped? No, it's gotten worse than when it was exposed 20 years ago. Okay? These guys are criminals in white collars. Now, not all of them are bad. We have some faithful priests out there. Thank God for that. But when you have 50% and upwards of Catholic priests being homos or teaching homosexuality, 30% of the bishops and cardinals. Where did this come from? Okay, so it doesn't faze me or doesn't surprise me at all that they would think of propping up a fake Sister Lucy to further their agenda. If it helps, it's going to help. Okay, so the thing we got to get over is, well, is this really possible? Yeah, it's really possible. If you knew the things that I knew, you would say the same thing. Okay, so we're in dire straits. We're in dire straits. And my new theory on this whole thing is all this fanfare about Sister Lucy is superfluous in any case, because the consecration was already done by St. Pius or Pius XII in 1952. I mean, I don't know how clear it could be. The Pope himself says, I'm consecrating Russia according to what the Blessed Virgin Mary told Sister Lucia to tell me what to do, and I'm fulfilling, finally, the consecration of Russia that I was supposed to have done in 1942. I don't know what more you need. Okay? And heaven never came down and said, well, sorry, you didn't do it right. You need to do it again. No word from heaven. The last time we heard from heaven on Fatima was 1952. That's it. And 2 months later, in July 1952, Pius XII does the consecration of Russia. Okay? It's an open and shut case. So that's why I'm saying all this fanfare about, Sister Lucia said this in 1980, then she said that, and this and that. It's all superfluous because it's already been done. Okay. And if it wasn't done by heaven, then they would have told us. The very reason Our Lady came back in 1952 to tell Pius XII, okay, look, you tried in 1942, you did it halfway, but you didn't complete the job, so we're telling you again to do it. Now, if he hadn't done it correctly and it wasn't accepted, then heaven, by their own track record, would have come back and told us that it wasn't done correctly. Okay? So, yeah. All right, let's see what else we have here. So Omar says, I don't get any ads, he says. That's interesting, Omar. No ads come up on your viewing of this program after it's been recorded. So you got me. I'm totally confused now. All right, Alex has a question. Did Peter really leave his wife and kids? The Bible makes no mention of his wife or kids, just his mother-in-law. Could he have been a widower, and that's why Jesus chose him? Yeah, it's very possible. Okay, but Paul talks about, but we don't know when that happened. Paul talks about Peter when Paul in 1 Corinthians 7 is talking about whether to be celibate or not. And he says, I wish all men could be as I am, but I have the right to take a wife just like Peter did. Now, but it's not definitive there whether he's just talking in the past about Peter taking a wife or actually having a wife at that time. We just can't be sure. So the fact is, yeah, Peter did have a wife. Whether he had kids or not, we don't know. Okay, so the Bible is silent on that. But he had a wife. But, just because the Bible doesn't mention wives of certain people doesn't mean they don't exist. It just means the Bible doesn't mention them. Okay? I mean, there's many cases in the Bible where we have strange people. We don't know who they are. We just covered one last week. Remember the one in Mark 14, is it, that was at the Garden of Gethsemane and ran away naked? Well, Mark doesn't give his name. We don't know who he is. We have guesses, of course, but we don't know who he is. So a lot of times you're going to find people in the Bible that have either are mentioned indirectly, and that's all we hear about them, and it may be different for different people. So, that doesn't mean, we draw conclusions on that scant evidence. It's just the fact that it's a hanging issue, and it will always be a hanging issue until we meet, Peter's wife in heaven. Hopefully she went to heaven. And all right, so that's all we'll take on that one. Question, is it possible for a large asteroid to destroy the Earth, or does the larger planets and moons save us from them? The larger it is, the harder it would be for it to hit the Earth, okay? That's why we have little meteorites usually hitting the Earth, because they do not have a great gravitational potential with other objects in space, and so they can travel rather freely. Asteroids, on the other hand, are a lot bigger, so they're going to be caught in the asteroid belt, which is between Mars and Jupiter, and there are thousands of them, okay? Maybe millions of little, not little, but asteroids. And we don't know where they came from. It's just a belt of asteroids that keep circling the sun, the same as Mars and Jupiter do. And very rarely do any of these asteroids actually escape. The reason they would escape, if they did, would be they were hit by something else. They could be hit by a comet. They could be hit by another asteroid. And once that inertia starts for the asteroid, it's going to keep on going. If it's great enough to break the gravitational escape velocity that it needs to escape from its gravitational force, there are many reasons why that could happen, but it's rare. Okay, so, and then, the size of the Earth compared to the size of the system that we're in, the Earth is like a little pinprick. So the chances of hitting a pinprick are very minimal, okay? So the odds are with us. I would say the odds of us being hit by an asteroid are, 1,000,000 to 1, if I had to put a number on it. All right, so all these telescopes at the Vatican Observatory that are looking for an asteroid to hit the Earth, they're looking in the wrong place. All right, next question. David says, would you agree that Jeremiah's prophecy in Jeremiah 19:11-15 was fulfilled in 70 AD when Rome sacked Jerusalem? All right, so let's take a look at Jeremiah 19. I'm probably going to say no. But I won't tell you why just now. 19 verses 11-15. I put on the old geezer glasses here. All right, so that says, and say to them, this is what the Lord Almighty says, I will smash this nation and this city, just as this potter's jar is smashed and cannot be repaired. They will bury the dead in Topheth until there is no more room. This is what I will do in this place to those who live here, declares the Lord. I will make this city like Topheth. The houses in Jerusalem and those of the kings of Judah will be defiled like this place, Topheth, all the houses where they burned incense on the roofs to all the starry hosts and poured out drink offerings to other gods. All right, so no, this is not referring to 70 AD. It's referring to the Babylonian captivity. Okay, Jeremiah is prophesying during this time, and the 10 northern tribes have already been, taken off into oblivion, and now we have just 2 tribes left, Judah and Benjamin. Jeremiah is writing during this time, and they do really no better than the 10 tribes, and so God sends the Babylonians to take them into captivity for 70 years. Okay, that's how this is fulfilled. So, 70 AD is not in the mix here at all. All right. Question: is there anything in Catholic dogma that requires early monepiscopacy for Peter's successors? I don't know what you mean by monepiscopacy. So you're going to have to be clear on your question there, Canadian Catholic. All right, question: can we venerate Eastern Orthodox icons? Not really. Okay, we can respect the fact that the Eastern Orthodox has their own saints. Okay, and they have their own criteria for how they make their saints. But anything to be venerated in the under Catholic dogma has to be approved by the Catholic Church. And Eastern Orthodox icons are not approved by the Catholic Church. Now, they may be very worthy of veneration. Okay, that's not the issue here. The issue is the official dogmatic authority of the Catholic Church to declare a particular icon or saint worthy of veneration. That's the issue here. And that's been the sticky wicket between us and the Eastern Orthodox for 1,000 years. Okay? They may have all the rudiments of Christianity, and I've defended them because they have the sacraments and they have the priesthood. Okay? So in that sense, they're Christians just like we are. But that's where the prerogatives stop. You see, if you're not going to say that the Pope is the supreme authority of the Church, and with that, all the decisions that he makes with the magisterium, that is the bishops and cardinals, who are the ones who decide who is worthy of veneration. Okay. If you're not going to abide by that, then you really have no official stamp of approval from the Catholic Church to do that. Okay. All right. Is there anything? Oops. Okay. Did you go to the recent Colby Center event in Front Royal, Virginia? No, I did not. Sorry. Should I have been there? No. So I didn't even know about it. All right. Robert says, Dr. Sungenis, have a happy and holy Easter. Thank you very much, Robert. Question: is there anything in Catholic dogma that infallibly defines that all of Peter's early successors exercise their authority? Yeah. Basically, when Pastor Eternus was made into dogma in 1870, which gave infallibility to the Pope on issues of faith and morals, that was basically retroactive, okay? Because if it's true, see, basically the Church will see the dogma, not dogma, they will see the doctrine practiced in the Catholic Church. And then there comes a time, and we don't know when that time's going to be, but there comes a time when the Church makes that doctrine into dogma. Okay? And once it's dogmatized, then that means the doctrine is of previous popes and previous years in Christianity is also dogmatized. Okay? So it's not the the doctrine of infallibility did not start just with Pius IX. It will be retroactive for all the popes prior. And so when they go in and they examine cases where the question of infallibility came up, like perfect example is Pope Honorius in the 6th century. Pope Honorius, the question came up because he wrote a letter to Sergius of the East when the East and the West were together and working together. And you could see that the East was looking to the Pope for authority, except that Honorius wrote a private letter, but nevertheless, it was from the Pope. And he said that Jesus had one will, not two wills, which is a heresy. Okay. So the question came up about even in that day, the question came up, does this harm the doctrine of the infallibility of the Pope? Okay, so the councils, the bishops, cardinals all got together and they all discussed this issue. And they said, no, it doesn't harm the doctrine of infallibility. Why? Because Pope Honorius did not say this heretical doctrine from the chair of Peter. He wrote it in a private letter to Sergius, the Bishop of the East. Okay, that makes all the difference in the world, because the dogma that was made in 1870 said that Peter has to declare this doctrine ex cathedra, that is, from the chair, the official vehicle for the Pope to declare dogma for the church. Okay, plus there's 3 other criteria he had to meet as well. But you see that the fact remains, and this is the important fact, is that the magisterium in the 6th century was debating this issue, because other than Liberius, who had some problems in previous century, and they discussed it then too, but it wasn't as prominent as the one with Honorius. So that's the one we usually go to. The question is, does this harm papal infallibility? But the very fact that they were talking about infallibility means that they knew it existed even then, before it was actually declared a dogma of the church. So it was a doctrine of the church, and everybody was abiding by it. And then comes Pius IX in 1870 and says, not only is this a doctrine of the church, this is a dogma of the church. So much so that you can't disagree with it. You cannot have an opposite opinion. If you do, then you can't be Catholic. Sorry. Okay, that's what dogma really means. Nobody can disagree with it. Prior to then, you could, raise questions about it, and they certainly did back in those days, but the consensus was, when the Pope speaks from the chair, he's infallible. Okay, so, all right, next question. Can you help me with answering accusations that the Catholic Church was responsible for murdering Huguenots, Albigensians, Waldensians, because according to Unum Sanctum in 1302, the government use of the sword was by the will of the priest. Well, there's a lot of back and forth on this issue. Okay. Look, I am not going to give any excuses to any Catholic that murders some other person of some other faith, because it did happen. And that's wrong. Okay. The church, however, does have the power to deal with heretics as they see fit. But since the power is divided between the king and the pope, usually it was the pope who said, okay, we have a heretic on our hands, and the king, in allegiance to the pope, would go out there and do the dirty work. Okay. And yeah, Huguenots, Albigensians, Waldensians were the victims of this. Okay. We don't do that anymore in the Catholic Church. Okay. And the church got their, let's say, principle of doing such at certain times from the Old Testament. Okay. Because the Old Testament was pretty strict about doctrine. And people were punished with capital punishment all the time in ancient Israel. And they got that from the Mosaic Law. Okay. Even adultery was punishable by death, by stoning. And of course, any other capital crime, homosexuality, murder, whatever, was punished by death in ancient Israel. And this was by order of God. Okay. It wasn't just Moses' idea. Moses was inspired to write these laws by God. He's the guy that came down from Mount Sinai, remember, holding the 10 Commandments in his hand. Yeah, well, there's a lot more to those 10 Commandments that were inspired by God to Moses. So the church had some precedent for this. But now that, the church is no longer having the same power, political power, any power that deals with governmental issues, she does not have that anymore. Okay, once she got rid of the papal states in the 1800s, things really changed for the church. She became much more secluded to only spiritual matters, only ecclesiastical matters. And if she did see one of her clerics in a capital crime, then she was to report that cleric to the civil authorities, whoever they were at the time, and justice would be done. And today, what do we find? Well, we find priests who are pedophiles being transferred from parish to parish and not reported to the civil authorities by the bishops. Okay. So they go from one extreme to the other. The one extreme being, yeah, let's kill the heretics, and the other is, let's shuffle these pedophile priests around so the civil authorities don't catch up to them. Yeah, and John Paul II started that trend when he took cardinal law into the Vatican to protect him from the civil authorities in Boston. For cardinal law's little dalliance with sending pedophile priests all over Kingdom Come in Boston, so they can continue their trade. Okay, so I'm getting off the topic here, but yes, at that time, that's what happened because the church had that authority. She had precedent from the Old Testament to do so. And this has a lot to do with the issue of capital punishment that Pope Francis has been dealing with. The only reason that got the leeway that it did was because of DNA evidence showing that a convicted criminal may not actually be guilty of the crime. And there's been, I think, over 250 cases where the DNA evidence has shown that. So you get a jury of your peers determining that you're guilty, and you may not be guilty, and yet you're on death's row and you lose your life and nothing else can be done about it because you're gone. That's the leakage that we have in the capital punishment issue. And until we figure out a system where DNA evidence is given prior to the jury's decision, which it always should be, and maybe from now on it will be, okay, those people who are much more sympathetic to those accused are going to have a say, which is the case today. Back in the 1300s, 1400s, nobody knew what DNA was, of course. So but we knew what heresy was. Okay. And the Albigensians and the Huguenots and the Waldensians were definitely preaching heresy. And if they had remained among themselves, they may not have had a tough as go of it as they did. Okay. But when you are the purveyors of a new sect, a new cult, a new religion, the first thing you want to do is make more members, because if you don't, then your religion's going to die out. And so that takes the fact that you're going to go out and start preaching your heresy. Once you cross that line, then the Catholic Church gets involved. And that's what happened to these groups out there. Okay. It wasn't just because they were Huguenots. It's because they were preaching a Huguenot gospel that was totally against the Catholic Church. This is the very reason that Boniface VIII had formulated the doctrine of no salvation outside the church, because there were many groups, these guys included, Huguenots, Albigensians, Waldensians, Jews, heretics, who were saying, Catholic Church, who are they? They're just another church. See, 1,300 years had gone by since Jesus was here, and now, they start feeling their oats, and they come to the decision, just like Miriam and Aaron did with Moses. Hey, we have authority too. We're God's people, and we know what happened to them. Okay, so that's why Pope Boniface made that decree. And good that he did, because look, you get all these groups out there vying for leadership, vying for saying they're the great religion of the world and they're going to convert everybody, and the Catholic Church is apostate. The Pope has to draw the line in the sand, and that's what he did at that time. Okay, and look, there's going to be collateral damage because of that, and there always is. So this world's a messy place. Sorry to say that, but it is. Things aren't going to go perfectly. There's going to be fallout, and there was at that time. Okay, all right, let's go on here. Does a stationary Earth have anything to do with us having large water oceans? Maybe Mars or any other rock planets have no body of water because of their spinning centrifugal force. No. The reason we have water is more biological than it is physical. First of all biological life needs water. So we got a lot of biological life on Earth. We have 8 billion humans. We have 5,000 species of birds. We have all kinds of animals everywhere. We have an atmosphere that drinks up a lot of water and pours it down on the Earth. Okay, so we need a lot of water. That's just the biological part of it. Okay. Then you have the fact that water is very convectional in the sense that it stores heat and very well, and doesn't release it all that fast as air does. So water keeps the temperature relatively stable on the Earth. So you need it for that sense. And as far as centrifugal force is concerned, you're going to have the same centrifugal force whether the Earth spins or the universe spins around it. That's the whole reason for relativity. Einstein's general relativity, which when he finally discovered that, things changed. And as a matter of fact, that whole theory put the Earth back in the center of the universe, scientifically speaking, made it just as viable as the Copernican universe. Why? Well, because of the notion of relativity. That is, you're going to have the same dynamic forces occurring, and the dynamic forces are the centrifugal force, the Coriolis force, and the Euler force, whether the Earth is spinning in a fixed universe or the universe is spinning around a fixed Earth. Same thing's going to happen. Okay. So really, the water has nothing to do with centrifugal force. The universe goes slow enough, we should say, that the centrifugal force is not going to be great enough to upset the water table that we have presently on Earth. Okay. The only thing that really moves the water table is the gravity of the sun and the moon against the Earth to control the tides. Okay. So you're going to get 2 tides per day. That water rises a few feet per day and goes down a few feet per day and then back up and back down. It's pretty fantastic what that water tide actually does. But that's really the only movement you're going to get. That's the only force strong enough to affect the rise and fall of the water, not the centrifugal force. Okay. Omar says, what did Sam say about Dr. Sungenis theology? All right, we already went through that. Omar, you're going to have to go back and watch the recording of the program because I covered that early on in this program. All right. Question from Jay. Any scriptural references or good books you know to help someone who struggles with being scrupulous? Not off the top of my head, Jay, because I've never had that problem. I don't know if that's good or bad, actually. I never had that problem, so I never searched for books on that issue. Oh, by the way, I don't mean to step you aside here, Jay, but somebody last week, oops, moving the camera here, don't want to do that. I keep moving this camera tonight for some reason. Somebody asked about the requirements for Lent. So I had my wife do her due diligence. And here's what we have. Anyone, this is during Lent, anyone 14 and older is to abstain from meat on every Friday. Okay. 14 and older must abstain from meat. 18 to 51, you must fast on Ash Wednesday and Good Friday. Okay. And as far as Lent is concerned, you must do something penitential, like mortification or an act of charity on every Friday. Okay. And then, and also on Lent, you must give up meat on Friday. Okay. No. So you can't do any mortification or acts of charity on Lenten Fridays. You have to give up meat on those Fridays. Okay. So that's what I got, and hope it helps. All right. Question: what do you think the biblical story of David dancing in the streets supports the argument for variation in liturgy styles? His dancing was not done in a liturgical setting, and that's a very good point, Alex. David danced in the streets because he gave praise to God, because God gave him the victory over his enemies in the wars that he was fighting. That's why he was dancing in the streets. I would too. So, and you got cymbals and the lyre and all kinds of instruments that David mentions in the Psalms that were played in the streets as well. Okay, I don't think we have any cymbals in the Catholic liturgy, if I'm not mistaken. So, yeah, there's a time and a place for doing liturgical dances and clashing cymbals and all kinds of extracurricular activity. It's not in the Catholic Mass. Okay. So those who try to confuse the two are confusing everybody. So you make a good distinction there, Alex. All right. Question. All right. So we already went through that question, KPN. Omar says, okay, no, it's about the Shamoun issue. What is our stance on Coptic Oriental Orthodoxy? Same as it is for Russian Orthodoxy. It doesn't, we have the Coptic Catholic Church, okay, that is under the Pope. And then there's a Coptic Orthodoxy, which is just like Russian Orthodoxy in the sense that they decide they're not going to obey the Pope. So really no difference there. Okay. Question, can you elaborate on the stricture to not work on Sundays? I've heard it said that the buying and selling refers to speculation. Is it sinful to buy milk from a parishioner on Sunday? No. Okay. What the Old Testament was trying to get across when it gave us, now I'm not saying that we follow the Old Testament precisely or in detail on this issue because the Old Covenant has been revoked. What we do is we get principles from the Mosaic Law that if they're good and wholesome and beneficial for the church, we incorporate them into the new covenant. And they come under new covenant jurisdiction. And the church will give the guidelines as to what you should do on Sunday and what you shouldn't do. And you can go read that in the Catechism, the 1994 Catechism. Look under, worship, Sunday worship, or might have Sabbath there. I don't know if it has that there in the index. But it has like 3 paragraphs of what you should or should not do on Sunday. Okay. And it's basically a modified form of what you find in the Old Testament. Now, look, in the Old Testament, you couldn't walk more than 3/4 of a mile. There was a case where a man who was picking up sticks for a fire was brought before the judges and determined that he was working on the Sabbath, and he was stoned to death. Okay, so it was very strict back then. Now, we don't follow that rigidness back then that they had back then. Now we just follow the principle, and we try to apply the principle of not working on Sunday in the sense that you refrain from your normal activity. And what's your normal activity? Well, your normal activity is going out to work, working for the man, and making money. Okay. And that's what they call servile work. And that was a stipulation in the Old Testament, no servile work to be done on the Sabbath. That meant your 9-to-5 job, it's over on the Sabbath. Don't be working in order to make money. That's the first order of business. Okay. And then to supersede that, you rest. And rest means that, of course, you're not working. But the specific thing was you're not working to make money like you are the other 6 days of the week. That was what the stipulation really meant. So the church, when you read these 3 paragraphs, will tell you, don't work on Sunday. Use the day as a day of rest. You can sit, stand, take a walk, drive a car, whatever you want to do, but don't work. I think that's a simple enough command to obey. It's, we don't want to get legalistic about this. you have a certain sense, certain understanding of what it means not to work. And the church is not going to come with a magnifying glass inspecting, oh, you know, you went too far in your car, or, you bought gas and you shouldn't buy gas. It's not going to do that. It's going to leave it to you, give you the freedom of will to know that, look, you're a Christian, you have freedom. This is the whole argument with Paul against the Judaizers. In Galatians, Ephesians, Corinthians, you name it, wherever he went, you had these troop of Jews following him and telling these Christians, you can't do this, you can't do that, blah, 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 and all this. And Paul says, don't listen to them. As a Christian, you have freedom to do whatever you want, as long as you stay within the church's guidelines, which are not very strict at all, but really principles that she's gotten from the Old Testament. You're fine. Okay? So that's why he told the Christians, look, I can circumcise or not circumcise. Doesn't make any difference. Why? Because as a Christian, I have freedom to do so or not do so. Okay? Because freedom is the hallmark of being a Christian. And so when we have those guidelines from the church, they're given to us under the guise that we have our freedom to decide how we are going to take those principles that God gave us about resting and apply them. And if you need a, catechetical lesson, or you need, 10 steps to what to do on the Sunday, you've gone too far. You don't need that. Okay? Because it's right here. It's right here in your heart. Your heart is going to tell you, okay, shouldn't be doing this on Sunday. Okay? And the church leaves it at that. She gives you a lot of leeway, because that's what it means to be a Christian. Okay? All right. Next question. Question: is it wrong or sinful to read demonology books, religious books like the Quran, watch horror movies or movies like The Wizard of Oz, Harry Potter, etc., or listening to certain music? Yeah, there are certain things you're going to need to know. You need to know where all these things originate from. Okay, like, most of these rock stars have sold their souls to the devil. Okay, popular names that you know. You need to know that. Okay, because you need to know, like, what's her name? Lady Gaga? Come on. I mean, yeah, she sold her soul to the devil a long time ago. And if she's got it, then most of them have it. And that's a problem for Christians. So you want to stay away from that as much as possible. Harry Potter, same thing. This is about witches and witchcraft and magic and all this stuff. That's a fantasy world, number one. And number two, it's going to take your child away from Christianity in one form or another. And I've seen it happen. Okay. Horror movies, no, you don't want to watch that. You're, just like on a Ouija board, you're inviting the demons to come in. When you open yourselves up to that kind of demon possessed production, not for Christians. Okay. Now the Quran, you could have it, as a study book. I have the Quran in my bookshelf back here. Every once in a while, I'll need to look up a verse, what they teach, and find out what they're saying so that I can teach against it. Okay. So the book itself is not going to be wrong. Demonology books, I have a couple of them on my shelf. And we need to know about how these demons operate. So obviously, we're using it for the purpose of study so that we can defend Christianity against demonology, not to become demons, of course. All right. So especially nowadays, you need to protect your kids. You need to watch over them like a mother bear over her cubs. I mean, 24/7. And don't stop. Don't think you're being a nag. This is the one responsibility that parents have that you have to be consistent on. In every instance, you have a suspicion your child is into bad music, bad movies, drugs, cigarettes, alcohol, pornography. You need to get in there and don't think, well, I'm going to, invade their privacy. Like that's what, one of our 16 or 17-year-olds says, when mom went in there, find out what she was looking at on her phone and found out that it was something she shouldn't be doing. Well, you're invaded my privacy. Yeah, well, that's my job, sweetheart. And if I don't do it, nobody's going to do it. Okay. That's the attitude parents should have. And if you don't, you're going to suffer the consequences because those kids are going to turn into demons and they're going to make havoc of your life. Believe me. So you better catch it now while they're young and stop it in its tracks. And you got to be like a policeman, like a detective, because these kids are getting smart as to how they hide it, and they have all kinds of ways of contacting the other world that you don't know about on the internet. And if you're not monitoring their internet usage, then you're making a big mistake. And you need to put strictures on it. You need to put time when you start, time when you're ending on the internet. You have an hour. And then I'm going to go check your browser to see where you've been. And I even have something to check if you erase something from your browser. Okay? That's how serious you have to be about this stuff. Because once you let it go, you're going to be the sorry one. Because the more you let them go, the harder it is going to bring them back. So take the bull by the horns and do it. All right. Question. What do you think about WLC's view on the historical Adam and the backlash he got from the community? I don't know who WLC is. We live in a world of acronyms, a world of three capital letters that describe basically anything you want to talk about. But, I don't know who WLC is. So, and I'd like to answer that question because it looks very interesting. So Psalm 23, come back and ask the question. And I'll drop down in a minute or two here to see if you have asked that question since you waited in line here. Let me just take a drink here before I get too thirsty. All right. Question. Is Medjugorje part of end times prophecy about false prophets? I think it's the biggest hoax yet on Catholics and am troubled by many Catholics who promote it heavily. What's going on? Stay away from Medjugorje. Well, my opinion, that's what it is. Yes, it's one of the biggest hoaxes ever perpetrated on Catholics. Sorry to say, however, that many Catholics are prone to this because that's what they're looking for. They're looking for dreams and visions and, this visionary over here and that over there. What's flying around Catholicism today in regards to visions and apparitions and all this stuff, I'd like to take it all and just throw it in the garbage heap. Because it's hard enough sifting out the true from the false, but then it preoccupies your whole life. And you're always waiting for the next vision, the next revelation, the next this, that. And this is how people get hooked on things like Medjugorje. And some of them deserve it because they don't really practice the Catholic faith. They just like all the supernatural things that happen in the Catholic Church. That's what they get hooked on. But they don't have the real faith. And so a lot of them are deceived. And that's why Medjugorje keeps going, because you have a lot of people there who really aren't looking for true faith. They're looking for an exciting time. And Medjugorje gives it to them. So, yeah, stay far away from it. Has nothing good about it that you need to live your Christian life. Okay, and that's what it's all about. How can I get myself to heaven? And if you have even the slightest suspicion that something's not legit, don't go near it. Okay, I've known people who've lost their wives. I've known wives who've lost their husbands over Medjugorje. I know parents that have lost their children, because once you get tangled up in this cult, they have a way of they'll be your best friends as long as they can get you away and have you work for them or take your money. And boy, are they good at going after the money. These people are experts at it. They know the weakness of most people is in the religious area. And if they can pretend to be God to you, they will. And they will be your best friends, better than you have ever had a friend in your life. They make it their business to do that. That's how cults grow. Okay? And that's what's going on in Medjugorje. So stay way, way far away from it. All right. All right. Question: what is the Catholic stance on the KJV Bible? Well, the same as it is on every other Protestant Bible. That is, be very careful that these are not authorized versions or authorized translations of the Old and New Testaments. And so you're not going to take them before you check it out. You're not going to accept what their translation is. And there's a lot of translations, especially in the King James Bible, that were diametrically opposed to the Douay-Rheims Bible that came 2 years before it. Okay, like using the word imputed in Romans chapter 4. Well, imputation is a theological concept, and that is that Christ imputes. If you know what the word imputes means, it means he gives to you a credit as if you had righteousness, but you don't really have it yourself. That's what impute means. And the Catholic concept is far away from imputation. It's the word we say infused. You're infused with righteousness. That is, you absorb the righteousness of God and you yourself become righteous in justification. It's not just a credit that God gives to you that says, all right, we'll put you in the class of justification, but you yourself are not really justified. You say, that's the Protestant concept. And the KJV promotes that concept, okay? And so does the RSV or the NASB. All kinds of Protestant translations promote that concept. So that's where you have to be careful. And there's some Protestant versions that were pretty good, like the Revised Standard Version of 1946 and 1952. And so the Catholics made a Catholic version of the Revised Standard Version called the RSVCE, RSV Catholic Edition. In 1966, they made one. They made another one in 1987. So if you want a Protestant Bible that's relatively safe, that's been sanctioned by the Catholic Church, the RSV would be your Bible. All right. Question: how can we understand the canon of the Council of Nicaea that seems to limit the jurisdiction of the Pope? Canadian Catholic, you're going to have to show me the place in the council where it says that. And I've read the council. I don't see exactly what you're saying. I don't remember where it is, but so if you want me to discuss it, you're going to have to bring it up verbatim from the council, and then we can discuss it. Okay? All right. Question. In Luke 21:25, where it says, there will be signs in the sun and moon, what kind of sign does this mean? Well, Luke 21 is talking about the end of the world. Okay. Whenever you see the stars involved, and that would be true of Matthew 24, verse 29 to 31. It will be true of Mark 13, verses 44, 45, I think it is, and Luke 21. They're all basically looking at the same time period, which is the second coming of Christ. And so all of them will include the stars as well as the sun and moon, because the whole universe is being obliterated, okay, at that time, at the second coming. When you find just the sun and moon, it's talking about the first coming of Christ. Now, this is interesting how the Bible does this. You'll have, like in Joel 2, verse 32, you'll have the prophecy wherein the sun and moon will be darkened. And then that's fulfilled in Acts chapter 2, when it refers back to Joel 2, and it says, the day of the Lord when the sun and moon will be darkened, and your old men will dream dreams, your young men will see visions, blah, blah, blah. So a direct fulfillment of Joel 2, which said the same thing. But then we find, well, when did that happen? When were the sun and moon darkened? Well, we find in Luke 23, 45, I think it is, where it says the sun at the cross was darkened for 3 hours, okay, from 12 p.m. to 3 p.m. Darkened, okay? So this wasn't an eclipse. And if you paid attention to the readings this Sunday, when we read the Passion of our Lord and some of the versions of the booklets that we have in the pews, where it says, and there was an eclipse of the sun. No, because eclipses of the sun don't last for 3 hours, okay? Which gets into a whole other story about how they try to make supernatural events natural, okay? Our liberal commentators today. And you find that a lot in the translations that they use for the liturgy. That's another point, however. But the sun was darkened for 3 hours, and the moon, if the sun is darkened, then the moon is darkened, okay? That's why it says the moon will turn into blood. Because the moon, actually, when it turns into blood color, is actually reflecting the Earth's light, okay? But if the sun is darkened, then the Earth doesn't have much light, of course, so the sun's going to, or the moon's going to appear dark. At least the face of the moon that's facing you is going to appear dark, because it's not reflecting the light of the sun, because the sun is darkened, okay? So whenever you have the sun and moon darkened, it's talking about the first coming of Christ. But whenever you have the sun, moon, and stars being taken out of the way, then you're talking about the second coming of Christ, because now the whole universe is being obliterated, okay? So there's basically 2 days of the Lord. Joel 2 talks about a day of the Lord, and Joel 3 talks about a day of the Lord, but they are 2 different days of the Lord. They're both the same, the day of the Lord. The first coming and the second coming are both days of the Lord, because vengeance is coming. That's what the day of the Lord is. And who was the vengeance directed to in the first coming? The Jews. Okay, this is when God finally rejected the Jews as his chosen people, as the carriers of the gospel, of the place where you would find worship. That was no longer going to be the case. They were going to be judged, and the old covenant was going to be revoked. And the final stages of that judgment ended up in 70 AD, when the whole Jewish nation was obliterated by the Romans. Okay, so that's the day of the Lord. All right. And then, of course, another day of the Lord is coming for the whole world at the second coming of Christ. And so you'll see this in Scripture. You'll see sun and moon, or you'll see sun, moon, and stars. All right. All right, Majiguri, we already answered that. Okay. All right. Have you seen the debate between Steve Gregg and Tim Staples? If so, what did you think? No, sorry, I didn't see that. Nobody see. I'm at a loss because unless somebody tells me about what's going on, I'm too busy doing my own stuff to pay attention. So just keep that in mind, folks. I need the prompts to go and chase these things down. But I'm sure they taped it, right? So if somebody has the link to that, I'd love to see it. I don't even know what they debated about, but I if you think it's worth me looking at it, I'd love to look at it, and I'll give you my 2 cents. So Psalm 73, do that for me. Send it to Sungenis at AOL.com, and I'll be glad to take a look at it for me. Send me the link. All right. What else do we have? Nancy Drew, what are you doing here? Do you think the events going on now are revelations playing out? Okay, first of all, Nancy, it's not revelations. Okay, it's a revelation. That's the name of the book. Now, it has revelations in it. All kinds of revelations are happening in there, but it's called Revelation. And I like to call it the apocalypse. It sounds much more intelligent, doesn't it? The apocalypse. Anyway, yeah, they're being played out now, but they're not being played out like, the apocalypse is a script. Okay, they're only being played out in general because the apocalypse is talking in very general terms about our time on earth. Okay, and it's not talking about any specific event that you can point to in history and say, oh, that's talking about, the Protestant Reformation, or that's talking about the Muslims, or all this. No, the Revelation does not do that. It talks in symbols from chapter 4, even chapters 1 to 3. There's a lot of symbols, but especially from chapter 4 onward to chapter 22, it's all symbols, and you have to be able to interpret those symbols correctly, and that gives you a general idea of what has happened and what will happen between the first and the second coming of Christ. And that's about all the further it's going to take us. Okay, just going to give us those major events like the binding of Satan at the cross, the preaching of the gospel, how Satan's going to come at the end of time, and things like that. So just talking in general. Some people try to make what we call newspaper exegesis out of the Revelation. In other words, the Revelation is talking about, the rise of Hitler here and 666, and 666 has been a poor number. I think everybody from Mussolini to Hitler to Chiang Kai-shek has been 666, and of course they're all wrong. Okay, time takes its toll and shows that they're all wrong. So that's exactly what God doesn't want us to do. All right. He wants us to, like the parables, they talk in generalities about the 4 kinds of people there are, by using the 4 seeds. Some fell along the wayside, some got choked by the thorns, some this, some that. So we have a general idea of what to expect when we go preach the gospel. That's all the further it goes. Okay. So that's basically the way that Revelation is written. Now, if you want to know more, of course, you can always buy my book on the apocalypse, available at robertsongenis.org. And it's also in the 4th volume of my commentary series. I did a commentary on the whole New Testament. The apocalypse, of course, would be in the 4th volume. And there's 250 pages of detail about the apocalypse in that book. So you can purchase that at robertsongenis.org. All right. We got 4 more minutes left, folks. So 5 more minutes. Andre Aces says, any frame of reference can be considered at rest while the rest of the universe moving around it. And Fred Hoyle says, any point can be the center. Do they mean any planet? No, they mean any point. Because of what I was talking about earlier, that's the nature of relativity. Okay? What they're saying is that you can formulate the mathematics in such a way where any point can be drawn up to be the center, the dynamic center of the system. Okay? It all depends on what you do with the math. And this is what's scary about math. Is because math can basically be made to say anything. Okay? You know, in one sense, math is good because it's very precise. You go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And in another sense, it depends on how you make both sides of the equal sign equal. And you can do that in a number of ways. You know, you can say 4 equals the square root of 16, you know, or you can say 2 plus 2 equals the square root of 16. Both of them are the same, but you have different addends on one side than you do on one equation than you do on the other equation. So they're not exactly the same. Okay. So that's where you have to be careful with math, because it can be manipulated to such a point where what seems to be the truth in one frame is a different truth in another frame. Okay. And you know, that's where you have to be careful. All right. Sam says, in recent studies, there are more proofs for geocentrism than heliocentrism, especially after Kobe probe. How much longer do you think they will and can come up with new theories to try to disprove it? Forever, Sam. Until the end of time. Yeah. Look, these guys are not in it for the truth, okay? The only reason we get enough information about geocentrism to publish in a movie like we did with The Principle, or that I can use to publish in books, is because every once in a while the truth leaks out from these very scientists who have a vested interest not to promote geocentrism. Because, see, they didn't come up with these books or whatever they write knowing that there's geocentric hunters out there waiting to see what pearls of wisdom drop from their pen. Okay, they wrote it because they see this scientifically. And then a guy like me comes along and says, ooh, do you see what he just said? He just verified the Genesis universe, Earth in the center and everything built around it, without even knowing that he did so. You see why? Because he's not worried about someone taking his words and making it conform to the Bible. He just wrote it because that's what he saw in his telescope, okay, or his oscilloscope, or his microscope, whatever he saw. He wrote it down, and you know, he doesn't have any agenda. At least the small town folks, the small scientists. The larger ones, oh baby, they have an agenda. Okay. Yeah, they're all in the upper echelons, and they're paid a lot of money to keep the status quo going, like the Big Bang and everything else. And if they don't, then they are ousted. Okay. So the other scientists, even some of the bigger scientists, we get pearls of wisdom from them like you wouldn't believe, and they don't even know they're saying it. And then we collate all these, gather them all together, and put them in a book or a movie. And we say, look at this, folks. The very scientists in the world who are telling us that there's no God, the earth is not in the center, and blah, blah, blah. We show you where they actually say the opposite, or they admit the reasons why they're not going to capitulate to an earth-centered universe, and that's because they want to destroy the notion of God. They're all atheists. 90% of them are atheists. And they know that an earth-centered universe is just like saying there's a God. Why? Well, because they know it's not going to happen by chance. The earth is not going to be in its center by chance. What fool would believe that? All right. So they know this coming into the game. The whole reason we have the Big Bang Theory is because the guy who invented it, Edwin Hubble, and you know him because his name is on the Hubble telescope, saw that the earth was in the center when he looked through his telescope. Now you might say, well, how does he see the earth in the center? Well, it's a long story, but basically when you add up all the figures, that's what it amounts to. And he didn't like it. And so he had to come up with a theory to get the earth out of the center. And he used math to do it. Okay. And came up with this thing called the Big Bang balloon universe. That's how it all originated, from a guy who had a religious bias against Genesis. It didn't come from gathering scientific facts from here and there and everywhere, putting them all together, shaking them up, and coming up with the Big Bang. No, it came from a religious bias against the very thing he saw in his telescope. And he said, I'm desperate. I need to figure out a universe that doesn't put the earth in the center. And here it is. It's called the Big Bang. And we've been living with it ever since. Okay. These guys are as dishonest as the proverbial used car salesman. All right. You can't trust any of them. The only thing you can do is go into their writings and find out these little leaks they have here and there that actually tell the truth. And then we can put it all together in a movie or a book and show you what the truth actually is, which is what I've been doing for the last 20 years. All right. One more question, and then we got to go because the old man is tired. All right, Michael, you're the last one. Can you explain Acts 4, where everything was held in common? This seems like a well-abused passage, and I'd like to know how to defend our teaching on private property in light of it. Because it deals only with the church, and it deals with a fledgling church, the beginnings, the very beginnings of the church. It does not deal with governmental economies. It doesn't deal with, Keynesian economics or anything like that. Okay. It just has nothing to do with that at all. This was a church that was like an infant, and it needed money to start things up and keep them going, sending these missionaries out or building a church, all kinds of things, taking care of the poor in the church, all kinds of responsibilities they had. The only source of money they had was from the people in the church. And they all agreed that, to be fair, every one of them would give their income to the church, and the church would distribute it to those in need first, and then afterwards to those, who had to live, of course. And it was a good system, okay? And that's what it was used for, only for the church. And that continued. As the church got bigger, things, matured, and there were other places the church could, they could count on the government to help them here or there. That happened in various places, not often, but that whole idea about having things in common was a church idea, not something that is to be spread about the world. Okay. These were people who dedicated themselves to the Christian faith and had as their sole love the growth of the church. And that's why if you didn't want to be a member of the church there that, asked you for your money, you didn't have to be a member of the church there. Okay. You had the freedom not to be there. But if you committed yourself then you committed yourself. And that's why Ananias and Sapphira in Acts chapter 5 were severely chastised for cheating the system that they had already agreed upon. They lost their lives because of that. Okay. And this sent a message to every Christian that was there that don't play games with God. If you're going to commit yourself to give, then give, or God's going to come after you. And so they had not only the love and freedom to give, they also had the fear of God put into them. And that's a great combination, love and fear. You can't get any stronger than that. So, all right. That is it for tonight. We will see you again tomorrow. Next week. I wish it was tomorrow, actually. I wish I could do this every day, but the old man just doesn't have enough energy. So before I leave, let me give my little speech about go visit my website, robertsongenis.org. There you will see a donation button. You can donate anytime you feel led. You're free as a Christian to give as much as you want or as little as you want, or nothing at all, of course, because you have freedom. And we promote that freedom on our website by having that donation button. Here, you're free to press this. And you can donate monthly, whatever you like, and we will appreciate every cent that comes in, I can assure you. We also have an assortment of books and DVDs and all kinds of good things. So go visit, browse the website, made just for you. And let me see, update. Let me see, I have an update on the first volume of the commentary of the New Testament. Mark, Matthew, John, 780 pages long. I am in the last stage of editing it, and we should have it available next week, amazingly enough. So now somebody's going to ask me, why did you put Mark first? Well, because Mark's gospel is basically like a schematic of the rest of the gospels. And I put a lot of maps in there and a lot of stuff that's not in Matthew and John. That's sort of a preliminary introduction to the rest of the gospels. So that's why he's first. And he's the shortest, the most concise of the evangelists. So it's there. 230 pages of Mark commentary have been added to Matthew and John, and that'll all be in one volume. And then the next, of course, is to get the second volume done, which is about halfway done. And then I need to start working on that. So that's why I need your support. That's why I need your help. That's why I need your prayers. So if you'd be willing to help me, I would appreciate it very much. All right. Take care. It was nice to be with you. May God bless you this Easter Sunday, and may the Spirit of God draw you closer to Jesus and the Father. God bless you all.